Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's episode of Unapologetic Confidence. And today we have a very special guest, Susannah Margison, and I'm so excited for this episode and for you to experience her expertise and what she has to share. So, Susannah is a lawyer, conflict strategist, and coach who will help you recover from professional and personal setbacks. She'll rehab your reputation, help you lead others, and resolve any conflict you might have in a non-cringy way. I've had the pleasure of working with Susannah personally, both in my personal life and in my business, and you are in for a treat with this episode. Cannot wait to dive in. Hey, Susannah, thank you so much for coming and joining me on the Unapologetic Confidence podcast. I'm so excited to have you. How are you doing?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm just very excited for you and this podcast. This is going to be the gift that the world didn't know they needed. I'm so happy to be a part of it.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for being one of our early guests. This is so exciting. And thanks for also being, not just inspiration, but someone who's always been in my corner. I think for, the last year we've been working together pretty much. We're coming up on a year anniversary. And
Oh my
so
gosh.
yeah, I think you've really seen myself through so many stages of my personal life and my business life and just so many different phases over the last year. And so it's really cool to kind of bring it all together, bring it all back and have you be a early guest here on the podcast. So thank you so much for being here. So I want to just jump into it. Obviously, when
Mhm.
it comes to unapologetic confidence, the brand, again, because we've been working together for so long, you
Yeah.
totally understand what is unapologetic confidence. And I truly believe, that's what you do in your work, in your coaching with so many of the people that you work with. You work with, high achieving individuals and, people in the C-suite and entrepreneurs and all of that. And yes, you coach them through conflict, but you also coach them in changing their self-concept and believing in themselves. So why don't we start there? Let's talk a little bit about the work that you do and how the work that you do helps your clients step into their unapologetic confidence.
What a great question. I think one of the biggest things I would start by saying one of the main reasons why people come to see me at first is because something's going wrong. And that's normal. I am a lawyer. I'm not just a coach, I'm a lawyer. And I fix problems. And so usually they're coming to me because they want a problem fixed. They're having some kind of interpersonal situation. Almost always the interpersonal situation has some kind of a legal component to the relationship. So whether it's like a client dispute or a workplace dispute or a partnership dispute, and we need to untangle that mess. And once we do, one of the things that often comes up is there are these inner blocks that are preventing people from really standing in their power, really standing their ground, and enforcing their boundaries. And a lot of people, myself included, don't always pick up when those inner blocks are showing up. And what happens when those inner blocks are at play is people overreact in situations, they sometimes underreact in situations, and they put up with stuff that they should never be tolerating. And so one of the beautiful things about my client journey is that yes, they come to me because there's a problem. Once we unearth some of those limiting beliefs, we work to handle those. And then I always say, I'm like, dream big. Like, I want you to look back on this situation and be like, I hated it when it was happening, but oh my God, I used it. And my life, like, not only did I rise above, I fucking soared. Like, I handled it. It's like queen maker energy, right? Like, if you're going to come to me, I'm going to turn you into a queen. That's happening.
I mean, I've experienced that. So yeah, you're not just talking about, just saying these esoteric things that, this is what I do. No. Like you literally do.
I've got my receipts. I've got my receipts, but honestly, I do like I'm very discreet at the same time. So I'm not one of those people that will flaunt who my clients are because some of them are high profile and they don't want that. And discretion is often the name of the game, especially when you have a reputation to protect. So yeah, but I do have my receipts, that's for sure.
Totally. Okay, so tell us a little bit more. I know you mentioned you're a lawyer. That's your background and you've been practicing as a lawyer for many years.
Yep.
What happened that made you make the shift from going from a lawyer to a conflict coach?
I think bottom line is I've always wanted to solve problems for people and I've always wanted to correct injustices and I've wanted to just resolve situations for people. Like I wanted to be there for people when they needed it most. I also have always had a bit of a thing for politics, like not in the sense I would never run for office, but I love the campaign strategy side of things. And I love the creation of an image and how to sell that image and kind of the public relations side. And one of the things that I realized very quickly as a lawyer, because I did trials, was that you're always creating a narrative. And in court, the narrative is supposed to be the truth. And I am quite on, like, I am honor bound to that. Of course, I would never create a narrative that isn't true. But there's sometimes different versions of facts that people want you to focus on. There's sometimes different weight that's put to different facts. So the narrative creation can be very, very important. And one is going to win the day, and you would like it to be yours. What I then realized was that there's so much that goes into the strategy of a trial, and there's so much of that that can be used in everyday life that would prevent someone from even getting there. And I wasn't doing that. And so I thought I can actually use my skills for good. I can be the mix of Jerry, whose last name is escaping me, from Succession, without all the shady shit that she does, Wendy Rhodes from Billions, again without the shady shit, and Olivia Pope without the shady shit. Like I can solve problems in a more creative, holistic way. And that really led me to do coaching, because I wanted to do law differently. I wanted to help people more holistically. Um, I wish I had a sexier answer to that question, but it wasn't really like a clean thing. Like it was sort of, I was ebbing, and like I was testing the waters and ebbing and flowing and really trying to find my niche. And now I found it. Like I'm queen maker, fixer, lawyer, personal counsel. I've got clients from around the world, so I obviously can't be their lawyer if they're not in my jurisdiction, but certainly their personal coach and advisor. I'm certainly that for them too.
Yeah, totally. That's amazing. And yeah, I think it's interesting. So, your membership, the sum, is one of the things that you've been working on and that you've been growing and building and really supporting your clients with. And so what kind of inspired you to create that? Because it's an amazing offering and I've been loving it. It's like, it's one of those things I joke. I'm like, I feel like I have Susannah in my back pocket.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I have loved about working with you is that, because of your background, as a trial lawyer and with all the other, I know you didn't really touch on it, but you have other modalities and ways of coaching
Yeah.
and trainings that you have and certifications that you infuse into your coaching. Because of that, I feel like the sum is a whole culmination of everything. And it is just so helpful, like going through something, anything, whether it's a issue with a team or an issue with a client or, like even on a personal level, obviously for me, like with my divorce, having you there and,
Yeah.
being able to support me in all aspects of my life, because that obviously comes into the business as an entrepreneur. So tell
Yeah.
me a little bit more about the sum. What inspired you? Why did you create it? And yeah, just tell us more about it.
The SUM stands for the Step Up membership, because I am helping people really step up to face their challenges and also step up to the next level of their life. And I was really inspired by this because I began to be in contact with a lot more young women who were newer in their careers, just getting established. And I also picked up on a lot of the societal conditioning that not even women are told, but we are told as people. And that tends to mean that we don't enforce our boundaries. We undersell ourselves, we underestimate ourselves, and we think very small. And there's almost like we have these invisible contracts with a society and with society that we all, I love the book, The Four Agreements, and we all sort of subconsciously agree to, but it's things like, nobody who looks like me ever succeeds in something like this. So you don't even try. And
Mm,
as a result of that kind of, I'll say low level thinking, because it really is low level thinking, people attract a lot of shit. Like they attract a lot of relationship issues, they attract some legal issues. Like there's just a lot of stuff that happens when you're not valuing yourself. So I discovered that I could do my coaching unbelievably effectively through a podcast. And that's the thing. Like the sum is essentially, it's a private podcast. There's a core course where I teach you how to approach life like a lawyer and really strategically. So if you're one of those people that needs to manage their brand, or if you've just become high profile in your organization, like this is perfect for, lawyers, doctors, dentists as well. Like those are people who you've got a team, but you also have a professional reputation to uphold. Then you need to be thinking about that. That needs to be something on your radar. And you can accomplish that by being coached through a private podcast. So we've got our core course. And then I have coaching opportunities during the month for people to work through some of their stuff. It's less than $3 a day, I might add.
Like
And
less than a coffee at
yeah,
Starbucks.
less than a coffee, and you can access it on the go. There's lots that you can either engage anonymously or you can engage as yourself and be really involved in the community. But I really wanted to make this accessible to as many people as I could because there are so many people who've historically been oppressed, people who don't feel seen, people who feel like they can never put a foot right. And I know what that feels like. I don't want anybody else to feel like that. And I want to help people really, access their power because I think that's going to make the world a better place, to be honest.
And so how do people access this power? What do you do with them that helps them access it?
Well, we have a mindset call every week, which is really important because one of the foundational things, like I was saying, this is step one to thinking like a lawyer, but I think it's so important. We might as well just call it a foundational thing is knowing your worth. You have to know what you bring to the table and you have to believe what you bring to the table. And so I coach people on that in our mindset call every week, and people can join live and be coached in real time just to help them get there. The other thing that we do in the sum is I tell people that I want them to have a moonshot goal. Like, I don't want them just to come because they're having shitty relationships with people at work. I want them to come because they want to accomplish something incredible. And just because the type of people I attract, you also have to want to make the world a better place. Like, that's kind of a given. I don't want any like Dr. Evils in my membership, but I want people to want to accomplish those things and to have that end game. And when they're thinking from the end game, that's when they can be really strategic about their conflicts and about, because we get into conflict between 4 and 7 times a day. Like it can either be like low key conflict where you're asking someone to do something and you're not sure if they're going to say yes, or it's higher key conflict or higher level conflict where you're in a full on situation. So I want them to be able to handle those effectively and also reach these incredible goals because that's the point, right? Like, what's the point of having a coach if you're just going to stay status quo? No, I say, let's go bigger.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like you don't work with people who are like building their businesses. You work with people who are high achieving, they have big goals, they have big things they have to do, and they know that they have big things that they have to do. They're not
Yeah.
like sitting there and not knowing it. It's like they understand the role and responsibility that they have as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as high achieving individuals. And I think that in working with you, you just kind of help narrow that focus and help them
Mhm.
understand what do they need to do, what are the mindset pieces, and how are they in their own way? I feel like is a
Yeah.
piece of it.
Well, and the other thing that I've discovered, and it's so great to be working with people because I think people do want to communicate more effectively. Your reputation is one of the most important things that you have. And if you lose the reputation and then you're in trouble essentially. And your reputation is going to be based on your relationships with other people. And it's really interesting the different ways that people communicate and the different ways that people receive messages. So one of the things that's happened in the sum, because people can coach like a hot seat coaching session, they can submit questions, they can say like, "Hey, I wrote this email, what do you think?" And then I give them my thoughts. And what I've noticed has been really rewarding is even through rewording one email for somebody, I can change and they can change, more importantly, the trajectory of their business. Like I can prevent them from sending the email that's going to be a business limiting email or a career limiting email. I also can help people spot reputation risks ahead of time and we deal with that. And then on top of that, of course, there's the legal side of things because for a lot of us, our worst case scenario is ending up in court. So you want somebody that's been there, who knows how the game is played, who's won. Like that. I mean, court's it's hard to say like win lose because it's not really a clean win loss in court, but I have had some clean wins. Um, in fact, dare I say that I have not lost a jury trial and never lost a jury trial in when I was doing that type of work. And so knowing that, knowing what happens, I can work backwards in the worst case scenario and set you up for the best case scenario.
Amazing. Yeah, and one of the things, Susanna, that I love about you, and one of the things that you shared with me, and this is what I find about coaching, is that sometimes it's not about these like big mind-blowing shifts.
Mm,
Sometimes it's truly about that one piece of information that just makes you think in a slightly different way that
yeah.
totally opens you up to new possibilities. And I think one of the things that you had shared with me a couple weeks ago was about how if you're ever talking to a client, or you're talking to a team member, or you're talking to somebody, whether it's a romantic partner or a friend or someone you're in conflict with, you don't actually have to give a response in the moment.
Oh,
That was a
no.
huge thing where, and you've embodied this and have taught this to me, is it's okay to say to somebody, I want to think about how I want to respond, and then I'm going to respond. That is a power move. And I think that speaks to, and we're going to get into this in a second, that speaks to your work in thinking like a lawyer
Yeah,
and understanding that, how I'm presenting myself and how I'm speaking, all of that can and may be used against me in a court of law. And so,
totally.
how can I use that framework and understand, okay, I don't need to respond right away. I can take time to think about what I want to say, and how I can utilize that framework and that understanding so that I can have more effective communication with those around me that I may be in conflict with.
Yeah. And it's not even just a court of law. Anything that you say can and might be used against you in the court of public opinion. And so, one of the things, and I think one of the secrets to power and authenticity is saying what you mean, meaning what you say, as the four agreements, which is one of the books that we're talking about right now in our weekly mindset calls. Be impeccable with your word, like be careful with what you choose to say, but also stand behind it. And if you're speaking from a place of true authenticity, if you're really confident in what you're saying, that's going to carry you a really long way. But silence can be a huge flex. Even there are some, like, you don't have, there's a great, I think W.E. Fields said this. I might be wrong about who said this, but it's not my quote. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. And
Mm,
there's a lot of noise. Like, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, want to be relevant, and they think that the way to do it is through picking a fight. And just because somebody is trying to pick a fight with you doesn't always mean that you need to engage. And actually, sometimes the power move is not engaging. And likewise, if you do need to engage, or if you're not sure, the power move is buying yourself the time to think about it. And that, I mean, there's a lot, first of all, it's respectful to the other person. The flip side is the double-edged sword of this is that they have to wait a little bit longer until they find out what you're going to do. So they need to think about, they also are going to be wondering what your next move is. And so you want to be careful about how you do it, because in the event that it's somebody like a client and you want to make sure they know they're looked after, then you do want to make sure that their brains aren't going crazy while you're investigating and figuring out what you want to say. If it's somebody who maybe the relationship isn't as important, or maybe they've done you wrong and you want them to have to sweat it out a little bit, well, that's the double-edged sword of buying yourself some time and not responding right away. And
mhm.
that can actually restore the power imbalance too, which is important.
Totally, totally. Yeah. Okay. So I want to kind of shift gears. Tell
Sure.
me a little bit more about, I know in the sum you have a framework,
Mm.
and I would love to dive into this framework because I think that this is something that will be super valuable
Yes.
to, obviously it's valuable to your clients, but also very valuable to everyone listening today. So tell me a little bit more about this
Uh,
framework.
So I have a framework. It's 6 steps to thinking like a lawyer. And we've already talked about the first one, which is knowing your worth. And that is arguably the most important. And that's where people who are people pleasing, people who are really reactive, like really quick to anger, people who are magnets for crap, tend to struggle in that area. And I don't heal the past, but one of the things that I do is I call out bullshit in the nicest way sometimes, but I'll try to be as nice as possible. But sometimes,
You're always very loving with it. It's like, can I call you out right now? Can I be honest? Are you ready
yeah.
for a truth bomb? I'm like, yes,
And you
please.
call it like the Susannah bitch slap.
I love getting bitch slapped by Susanna. It's true because you know what? Because yeah, it's loving, but it's useful and it's true.
Yeah, and it's shared from a place of wanting what's best for you, but that's the thing. And so, like, I can pick up on those logic errors and just shine a light on them and say, "Hey, just so you know, that could be wrong. What do you think about it?" And so I can help you change your thoughts so that you can feel a little bit better. I can help you see situations differently. I'm the queen of the reframe. That's great. But if you're wavering on the knowing your worth section, you're always going to be limited. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And sometimes that means that I'm working with clients who are also working with therapists. The sum, by the way, is a great booster to that stuff. I've got lots of people in the sum who have therapists, but they just like the forward thinking action steps, because I don't heal the past, although ironically, as a side effect of working with me, a lot of people do feel healed, which is lovely, but that's not my job. And that's not what I'm selling. I am selling getting you from where you are now to where you want to be. And it's very forward focused. So people love that. But if you don't know your worth, it's going to be really tricky for you to get to where you want to be. So we have to get that sorted out, period. The next step is to know your end game. And this is different from setting a goal because everybody talks about goal setting. I think goal setting is very important. I was saying I like everyone to have a moonshot goal. Your end game is what needs to be in place at the opportune moment so that your moonshot goal can happen. Your end game is about those like strategic steps that need to be there. And that's what I think separates out the sum from a lot of other programs is I'm just like, dude, great to have a goal, but what do you need? And let's break that down and let's start taking those steps now. Knowing your end game, there's three components to it. There's your life end game, there's your relationship end game in terms of like the reputation you want to have, and then there's the situation end game. And if all of those three don't align, or if you're not clear on one of them, then chances are you might fuck up a conflict response. Or your conflict response might seem really great in the short term, but it's going to bite you in the ass in the long term. So it's really important. I would say those two starting things are the foundation. Like we want to have that clear for us. I'll pause there because I know I could talk for hours about this stuff.
Yeah, no. I want to keep going through the framework. Like keep telling us all the different pieces.
Okay, so the third framework is all about knowing your position. So if you were coming in to see me in my office and I was running through and trying to decide if we needed to deal with, go through litigation or what have you, because my conflict strategies are multi-pronged. So litigation might be part of it, but there's usually other things. One of the things I want to look at is the strength of your case. I want to know what happened. I want to know what contracts are at play. I want to know what the rules are. I want to know what you say the other side did. I want to know what's at stake. Like I want to get my bearings and I want to really understand what is going to work well for us in any negotiation or conflict resolution and what we need to clean up. Like we want our side of the street to be super tidy before we go and start attacking somebody else. So knowing your position is step 3. It's very important. From there, we start looking at things from our opponent's side of things. Or when I'm working with business owners or high profile people, I'll say like, what's your competitor doing? Or what's your comparator doing? Because we want to just understand where we stand in this, but also if there is an opponent or if there is somebody who we need to engage with, we want to understand where they're coming from. And we also want to understand what they're going to say because you want to have a response for it. And if you don't have a response for it, if they have a point, you want to deal with that early. Like I don't want to wait until you're on the courthouse steps and we've sunk thousands of dollars into all kinds of things and, to figure out that actually, oh shit, the guy had a point and I'm going to give in, right? We want to deal with that sooner. The other thing is that not all opponents are equal. And from doing this, gosh, I've been a lawyer now for 12 years. I've met a ton of people and there's a lot of different personalities and there are some behavior patterns that come out when people are in conflict or when people are competing or when they feel like they're under threat. And so having somebody in your back corner who can say, okay, yeah, I've dealt with people like this before. I'm actually thinking we need a different strategy than what we would use for a regular situation can be game changing. So we want to really understand who we're dealing with and we want to understand what their end game might be, because to the extent that it doesn't conflict with ours, go for it, have at it, enjoy. And we can also sometimes use what they want as while we're trying to look for solutions. So we can take what they want and say, actually, let's incorporate that into an offer that we might make. So knowing where they stand is really helpful. And if you don't have the answers, then I have ways of filling in those gaps for people. The final 2 steps are all about picking the right strategy for interaction and then implementing. Now, no 2 situations are alike. I do not give cookie cutter ways of handling things because it doesn't work. And my thing with my clients is they're the expert in their situation. They're wonderful. They give me lots of information, but there's always going to be pieces that they either don't think to tell me or that don't seem relevant or just don't come up. So I always want to empower my clients to be able to make decisions from a place of being informed and from having done their homework, and also decisions that will serve them well. So I give strategic approaches that they can use. And then in step 6, which is all about implementing, I talk about how to gauge how things are going while they're implementing. I talk about how to set it up for success. And then I give my 10 tried and true tactics that people can use. And this is great because you can kind of take it and combine them and use it to create your own strategy. But that framework, it's so funny because I've been using this framework subconsciously for years, but it works for almost any problem.
Mm,
Certainly any conflict, it works. And it's very, very powerful. And I know it sounds like a lot, but when you get in the habit of looking at things that way and just reminding yourself, like, what's my end game? Sometimes I'll say, like, how would ideal Susannah show up for this? Kind of having that North Star can really prevent you from making a mistake that you later regret. So it's a super great framework, and it works.
yeah. And that's the thing. It's almost like you're reverse engineering what you want the outcome of the situation to be. And so you decide the
Always.
outcome and then you're working backwards based on all of those things.
Yeah. But at the same time, reevaluating the facts as you go along, because sometimes the outcome is just not going to be feasible for the situation. So a good example of one of those might be, you have a client, because I know a lot of your listeners are entrepreneurs. So you've got a client and they have defamed you online. And so your ideal outcome is you're like, I am going to sue the bastard for everything. I'm going to get justice, right? Sometimes I'm not discouraging that, but if the person doesn't have a way of paying you, then wasting a ton of money on a trial might not be that helpful for you, because you might not actually get any money at the end of the day. Like that, unfortunately, that does happen. There are ways that you can go about collecting, but it's not always super tidy. And
Yeah.
that might be a scenario where, yes, we have a desired outcome, but when we get the information from going through the steps, sometimes you have to circle back and be like, all right, now that I know this about this person, I don't know that getting $1 million from them is going to be possible. So what else can I do to find the win? Because there's always a win in a situation. It's just a matter of looking for it. And I believe you can turn any situation into a win. You just have to be creative about it. And it doesn't always mean causing somebody else to suffer. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why litigation is so limiting, because it does kind of impose that suffering on other people, which then in turn imposes suffering on ourselves. That's not to say it's never appropriate. It is at times, but I think we want to be a little bit more strategic about how we use it.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, so this is really interesting. So number one, at the foundation of this framework is knowing your worth.
Yeah.
And I love that so much. Obviously, in the context of this podcast and in the work that I do, it's all about unapologetic confidence. It's all
Yeah.
about knowing your worth, knowing where you stand, knowing what you bring to the table, and then showcasing that through your work, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to social media, when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to showing up online, everything that I love to preach to my clients and what I love to teach them, and I know you know this, is how can I take my story? How can I own it? How can I stand in my power and show
Mhm.
up so that I'm inspiring others just in the essence of my being and me being authentically me? And
Well, what's brilliant about you is that you see people's stories before they see them themselves. Like, you see people's potential. So working with you has been magical, because the way I was trained to think as a lawyer, and sort of the legal profession isn't, we're all about the egos in a way. Like, we're all about, the awards, and we kind of, we like make up awards to give to ourselves, but we're not, there's this like double standard where if you celebrate your wins, or if you're too peacocky about it, then you're kind of looked down on. So there's this like, be humble, but not too humble. Like, oh, share your wins, but don't. So it's easy for me to see it in other people. It's not always easy for me to see it in myself. And you helped me do that. And you helped me craft the story. And I think that's one of the things about humans, is like, we can do it for other people.
not
Sometimes when
for
you're doing it
yourself.
for yourself, it's really hard. So you are like the master at that, because you see the story before other people do, which is so cool.
Thank you. That means so much, but thank you. But that's, yeah, I think that to me, like, that's what I love doing is I love helping people see in themselves what they may not be able to see on their own. Exactly
Yeah.
as you said. And
And
yeah,
then you help them tell the story, like build the narrative, right?
yeah, and that's why I love it. That's why I love what I do because I work with such incredible people and it's really about like kind of teasing out their story and it's all there, it all exists. It's just about how do we take it and tell that story in a way that's effective and then leverage it so that we can obviously increase their sales and build a personal brand and all the things that we love to do.
And help more people, right? Like that's
And
the goal.
exactly.
Yeah.
And having impact. That's exactly what it is at the end of the day. And so to me, that's a really important thing, right? It's like if sometimes, some people sit there and they're like, I have a story. And exactly as you said, we don't want to be too peacocky. I don't want to show up. I don't want to tell my story. I need to be humble. I don't want to intimidate others. But the thing is with that is that when we don't show up and you have something to say, when you don't show up, you are quite literally holding people back from experiencing a transformation that might change their lives.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have a gift, you have something to share, but if I'm too humble and I can't share it because it's too scary to take up too much space and be too loud and be too much, you are
Yeah.
literally holding people back from experiencing that kind of transformation.
But the weird thing is, you're so right. I shouldn't even say but, I should say and. The weird thing about this is that you are so right. But when we're the people in the moment, and I see this because of the people that I work with, like the people I work with, their resumes are spectacular. Like I'm just like, wow, I'm so glad you exist because you're doing so many good things in the world. But when you tell them that, they're like, what? Yeah, no, but that doesn't apply to me. Like it's so funny how our minds will, I don't want to say gaslight because it's not really gaslighting, but our minds will be like, hang on, hold the horses. Like that might apply to others, but I'm still not good enough yet. Like it's so
Totally.
funny. So funny how
Yeah.
they do that. And in conflict, the problem with that is that first of all, in conflict, one of the things that happens, especially for people who are people pleasers, and by me, like I'm a people pleaser, I've turned it into my superpower, but for a while it wasn't really helping me, right? Now, totally different. Like now it's great. But you have to be careful in conflict because when you're a people pleaser, you might assume like your default might be, oh, fuck, I'm wrong. Like I'm wrong. If someone's mad at me, I must have done something. And it can take a while to get you to the place where you're like, hang on half a second. Like, no, they were being the asshole. Like I'm not the asshole. And if it takes you too long, then you can actually end up putting up with shitty behavior that tears you down. And
Mhm.
something that was so important for me to read about, and actually I read about this from this Harvard prof that wrote an awesome book called Getting Along. She talked about studies that spoke to how human bodies process the pain of rejection and the pain of being ostracized and publicly shamed and publicly humiliated. And in conflict, that's what we're dealing with. Like that's what we're dealing with. And so if you don't address the pain, and I'm not a therapist, but I'll call it out. Like I'll call out the shit when I see it. And sometimes people will be like, okay, I'm going to bring that to my therapist. I'm like, amazing. I need that fixed so we can fix the whole problem. Right. But like, if you sometimes just by calling it out or having that conversation, that's enough for someone to go, yeah, I'm not going to consent to that anymore. I'm going to rethink this.
Mm.
So not only can it hurt your business, but it can also hurt you as a person. And that, when you asked why I started this, like part of it was I don't want to see people going through that anymore. I don't want to see people hurting like that because it's awful. It's horrible.
So what do people need to do in order to know their worth?
I think there's a few things that people need to do. One of them is start noticing when you're bullshitting yourself or start noticing when you're mind fucking yourself. So there are four key types of thoughts or beliefs that are not helpful. And I use the acronym JAIL. Sometimes I use the acronym FAIL, but I'm going to use the acronym JAIL. The J is your inner judge. So that's that voice that's like, oh yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day and one of their big lessons was put my oxygen mask on before I put someone else's on. And as this was a personal friend, and I was like, you told me that like 10 years ago. Like I remember the roles were reversed and we were having this conversation. And I was like, it's so interesting because there was something in your psyche that you weren't allowing yourself to subscribe to that. And he's like, they were like, um, no, like that just, yeah, that was my mind fuck. And that was my inner judge. So if you don't know your inner judge, if you haven't identified when it's talking to you, then you're going to be a slave to it forever. So noticing that. The next one, the A, stands for assumptions, meaning assumptions based on past events. Sometimes this is our trauma. Like I had this one traumatic experience. If I do the same thing again, I'm going to have another traumatic experience and no bueno. Or sometimes it's like, I ran a sale in October and it bombed. So like, I'm never going to run a sale in October again. Sometimes the predictive value of that past event is not actually as strong as our minds are giving it. So, or it's not as strong as our minds are making it out to be. So we need to be careful. The I is for interpretations. This is a big one because a lot of the time we're like, that person, like he cut me off. He doesn't care about anybody in the road, blah, blah, blah. Like we just project so much onto other people, but actually we don't know. Like if there's 10 other ways the situation could be interpreted. So that's a way that we can get ourselves in trouble. I used to be a world-class interpreter and like making assumptions on stuff like that. And I got to tell you, my life has been much calmer in the past few years that I don't do that anymore. And then the last one is limiting beliefs. So that's the L in jail, which is, a woman, I hope this doesn't happen, but like a woman can never be president of the United States. That's a limiting belief that doesn't need to be true. So that's step one. And then step two, I would say, is create a glory folder. Start keeping track of the compliments that people give you, something you've seen or heard that speaks to your worth. Because often there's a lot more there than we think, or there's a lot more there than we think. And so if you can go back to it and look at it when you're feeling low on yourself, then you can start to deal with all of those mind fucks that might show up. Then I would say the third step, I'm going to add in one more step, is to start acting like you believe in yourself already. Like say to yourself, if I did have enough self-worth, like if I was somebody that had the self-worth that I would love to have, what would I do? And do that, do that, because we're usually waiting for something external to us to happen before we decide that we're worthy. And worthy is a fucking myth. It's this made up thing. It's not even like a standard that's out there. It's this like sliding scale of whatever you decide it is that day. So today, let's decide that you are worthy and act as if you already are.
Yes, I love that. And that's the thing. I think there's so many people who kind of compromise their standards.
Yeah.
Especially I think for me, like, one of the biggest issues that I had in entrepreneurship was being this huge people pleaser. And by the way, as an aside, one of the books that I've been reading that has helped me so much, and it's so funny because this is so not about entrepreneurship. The book is called Why Men Love Bitches. Have you read it?
I actually will get my clients to read that book.
Yes.
Because especially the ones that are struggling in personal relationships. There's one amazing, and she's good. But that book has been, I'm totally like aging myself. I'm like big sistering you right now. I read that book in law school. It's
Oh,
so
wow.
good. And then there's also another one called Why Men Marry Bitches too. It's so good.
That's the same author.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So here's the thing. I'm reading it. Obviously, it can be a relationship book, which is what it's intended to be.
Yeah.
But as I'm reading it, I'm actually not reading it from a lens of like, oh, do this to, in your personal relationships. To me, this is like, I'm reading this as like a business book because there's so many examples
Oh,
of
so many.
your worth and not settling for things and communication that is, not what you desire and not what you want. And I think it was just so funny. I think back to the days when I started off as an entrepreneur, my first year when I was a freelancer and before I built an agency and had all my systems and all those things. And the lack of boundaries that I had, the way I would answer a phone call at 8 p.m. when a client called me, like now I think like honestly, you're the only one of my clients like has my phone number. Like I don't
Oh,
do you know what I
and
mean?
I
Like,
would never dream of using it unless
of
it was
unless it
social.
was a personal thing, but I'm saying
Yeah.
like that's my point. My point is like there were no boundaries back then. There were no systems, there were nothing. I was just a freelancer, kind of getting my footing and understanding what it's like to be in this world. But I think when you don't have boundaries, when you don't have systems, when you don't have all those things, of course you're going to be a people pleaser,
Yeah.
and so especially as women in general. I think in society, we're always taught to be nice and
Yeah.
be kind and make everybody happy all the time and always be smiling and always dress nicely. And like there's so many like societal things that we're conditioned to do and believe about ourselves that it's no wonder that so many women are people pleasers. And that's not to say that, men are not people pleasers too. Of course, it can affect anybody.
Mhm.
However, I see it among so many of my clients. I know from my own personal experience, I can say that that was one of the biggest hurdles that I had, was being this people pleaser. And I think when you know your worth and you know what you bring to the table and you know what you do and what you can do, you can kind of turn down the dial on being a
Yeah.
people pleaser, because you know that, what, if I'm a people pleaser in this situation, it's actually not going to be to the benefit of my client or to
No.
my partner or to my friend.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think a great example, I have a client who is amazing. We love her so much. She is the kind of person who has a lot of requests. She wants a lot of things done, and we're always happy to accommodate it within reason, obviously. But there are some times where, she wants to completely change a concept of, a piece of marketing that we've created for her, to the point where I actually think it would be detrimental to her business to publish this type of thing. There was one thing she wanted to put out that I just thought would have been like really silly for her brand. And so people pleaser Tamar could have said, okay, for sure, we'll just do it. No worries. But
Mhm.
that's not me being of service to my client.
Yeah.
They're not paying me the big bucks to let them do whatever they want. They're paying me for results. They're paying me, for quality. And if I'm just going to be a people pleaser, I'm actually failing my clients. It is
Yeah.
my job to say, you know what? No, I don't think this is the right piece of marketing for you. I don't think your concept is correct. Here's what I think we should be doing as a professional. This is my professional opinion. And if I was a people pleaser, those words wouldn't come out of my mouth. We would do the thing for the client and they would get that. They wouldn't get the results. And then, the relationship would deteriorate, obviously,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't go well. And so that, I think, is one of the things that I have learned through kind of working through those people pleasing tendencies, is you're actually going to, I don't want to say the word people please. You're actually going to bring better results and make your client happier by
Yeah.
standing in your power, by knowing your worth, by saying, no, this is not good for you. As the expert, I can tell you that. And that's
Yes.
the biggest thing that I have learned.
Well, and that's what people are really paying for, right? Because especially with you, I think, like, let's be honest, there's all kinds of things like Metricool later, like people can schedule out content and people can, like, anybody can make a reel, but not everybody can make a reel that's actually going to accomplish their goals. And so they're asking you for your judgment and for your strategy and for your expertise. And if you're holding back on that because you're doubting it, then you're totally right. The value that you're bringing to the table has just plummeted. But the other really interesting thing about the boundaries as well, and I bet this has come up for you in your business, is when you start respecting yourself, you do carry yourself differently. And one of the key objections I hear from my clients, and some of my clients don't even, like, they don't act like people pleasers, like they are ball busters, but sometimes they're ball busters because they're people pleasing in a different area of their life. And so, like, you can be, it's not something that has to be blanket. Like, you might encounter an asshole and they might be being an asshole because they've been a people pleaser everywhere else in their life and they don't have any gas left in the tank to be a good person. Like, there's lots
Mhm.
of, like, it can show up in lots of different ways. But one of the things that I hear when I say, okay, let's start to put in some boundaries is, oh, but what if the other person fucks off? Like, what if I lose the relationship? Here's the thing, and this is what I always say. I'm like, number one, when you have a boundary, that suggests that you are somebody worth having in your life, like someone worth having around, right? Like, you're respecting yourself. You're like, hey, I'm high value and I want to be treated that way and I'm going to treat you that way and it's going to be awesome. So you're subliminally sending that message. The other thing that's happening when you're doing that is you're also making them value you more because you're not available all the time. Like, it's almost like you're a precious resource. And if somebody isn't going to cherish you or someone isn't going to respect your time, and if the whole relationship is predicated on them being able to take advantage of you, is it really that bad if they fuck off? Honestly. But what I've noticed, and this has been happening with a lot of my clients, is as soon as they put up the boundary, they don't lose the person. All of a sudden the person's like, oh, hello, hi, can I have some of this, please? Like, they actually get more respect. It's really counterintuitive, especially for those of us that are like, okay, if I put my stake in the ground, I'm gonna lose the gains I've already made. Not always.
Totally. And I've
Yeah.
seen that with my clients and even just myself in my own growth. Like when I have gone and I've set a boundary and said, you know what, you can't do that. You
Yeah.
can't treat me this way. They actually respect you more. And not only do they respect you more, I think boundaries don't have to be like we have this idea of like, oh, I'm a woman with boundaries. So I'm like so like rigid and no one can talk to me and no one can make jokes around me. And like, you know what I mean? Like there's those
Yeah.
kinds of things like that. I guess I don't want to call it a stereotype, but like when I hear boundaries, like that's like what I think of, like this
Yeah.
bitches kind of thing. And I don't even look at boundaries that way. I'm just like, you know, to me, boundaries are giving somebody information as to how they're allowed to interact with you. So when we work with clients, you have a contract. Contract is a perfect example of
Yeah.
literal, like written
Boundary in action right there.
and
Yeah.
and if you don't do this, then this will happen. Or if you do this, then this will happen as a result. Here's what I expect of you. Here's what you can expect of me. And that's what I think when you have no boundaries, you're actually creating a difficult relationship with your clients or with your friends or with your partners
All
because
right.
they just don't know how to interact with you. I've had
Yeah.
clients say to me, hey, like, let me know if this is scope creep. Let me know if this is too much. Let me know if this is whatever. I'm not sure. And obviously they're being respectful. And then when I say, hey, this is out of scope, or, we can do this, but it's going to be for an additional charge or whatever it is, they're grateful because they don't want to be, stepping on
Yeah.
my toes and kind of,
Yeah.
outside of their range. But also, there are some people who, they'll take whatever you'll give them. And
Yeah.
so they will take, like if you allow them to take up all your energy, they completely will take up all of your energy. And so I think boundaries are a really great way and a roadmap for people to know like how they can communicate with you in a way that is effective. And it just makes the relationship so much better.
Yeah, and it makes them more comfortable with you, right? Like it totally does. And yeah, and but you're right about the conception out there that's like, oh, or the misconception of like, oh, you have boundaries, you have to have all this like masculine energy about you and all that stuff. No, you can be very feminine energy about your boundaries. Like you don't have to be a hard ass about it, and you can even be nice about it. In fact, I would recommend that you be nice about it. And because most people don't want to violate your boundaries. Like at the end of the day, most people want to be good people, that we want other people to like us. We know that if we take advantage of other people, or if they feel like we've taken advantage of them, even if we haven't done it on purpose, they're not going to like us. And
Yeah.
so most people don't want to step on your boundaries. So if you can tell them that, that's actually really kind. And they're like, oh, thank you. Like that's because you're preserving the relationship. Like boundaries, there's a quote floating around out there. Boundaries aren't there to limit relationships. They're there to enhance them. Like if
Mm,
you respect a boundary, or if you respect a relationship, then you want to have those boundaries,
absolutely.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and
And I
that's
find
all conflict management too.
totally. And I find that when, relationships don't have boundaries and people feel like their boundaries are being disrespectful or
Yeah.
disrespected, that's when you kind of have a breakdown. And one of the things that I find it's so interesting, there's a lot of misconceptions as to what a boundary is. A boundary is
Yeah.
if you do this, here's how I will respond, or I will not respond and I'm going to walk away. That is the boundary is if you're going to communicate with me in a way that disrespects me and is not up to my standard, then you're not going to have communication with me. If you yell at me, I will leave the room. If
Mhm.
you raise your voice, I'm going to get into my car and do breath work for 5 minutes. But you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
are boundaries. And I think people don't understand sometimes what boundaries actually are and how to set them and how to communicate them. And I think one of the even harder things is when we set our own boundaries, how do we actually enforce them?
Oh, okay. You've said two really good things there. One of them is when you talk about people saying like, "Oh, you're not respecting my boundaries." And then they don't elaborate when you're like, "Oh my God, sorry, what boundary have I violated?" That, and Jonah Hill got himself in trouble for this, right? Like with the therapy speak, and then the texts got leaked, and like it was just a bit of a disaster for him. And people were saying like you're weaponizing the therapy speak, and so actually the way that you responded, what is the boundary? I'm so sorry. Like, what's the boundary is really important, because it's not only about saying the B word, it's about knowing how to boundary, which is the second really awesome thing that you just said. A lot of people, they know what boundaries they would like to have. They have no idea how to go about enforcing them in everyday life. And that's the gap that the sum fills for people, is like, I can tell you how to do it. I can tell you what to say. We can work together. If you're going to come to a coaching thing, we can work together to see what feels right for you in that moment, because it's not just like, having boundaries is wonderful, but you're going to have to repeat them from time to time because people are going to overstep and they're not always going to mean to. So having some language that's available for you to be like, whoa, like too much or something, so that you can let people know, is really important. And so one of the things that I do when I'm working with teams is, just like you were saying with some of your clients, I'll say, in the event that I ever overstep, please let me know, because I would never want to. So please tell me and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. And if you're not sure, like, how comfortable are you with that? And if you're not comfortable, then we can choose some language. Like, I'm working on my boundaries is a good one. And then it's like, okay, yes, let's talk about it. What's coming up for you right now? That can be a good one. Or even sometimes just like, I need a minute to compose myself. That can be some good language, but just coming up with some of that language so that you can feel comfortable expressing yourself is so important. And buying yourself a little bit of time is never a bad thing either.
Totally. Absolutely not. Okay, Susannah. So we spoke about knowing your worth. We spoke
Yeah.
about people pleasing. We talked about your conflict, your framework for solving conflict. We talked about the sum. We talked about boundary setting and,
Yeah.
authenticity and sharing your story and storytelling and all those things. This was an incredible conversation. I think there's so many pieces here that are going to be so many key takeaways for so many people who are going to be listening. I want to end this off. How can people work with you? We've talked about all these amazing topics, things that are super relevant. How can we find you? Where can we find you? And how can we work with you?
So you can find me by going to my website, susannahmargison.com. I'm sure that's probably going to go in the show notes, but that's there. And then also you can find me online on Instagram. I am Susannah the Coach, and Susannah is spelled with two S's and an H on the end. And coach, and Instagram is currently my favorite platform because it's my most creative and pretty, thanks to Tamar. But yeah, and also if you want more information on the membership, you can get that on my website as well.
Amazing. Okay. Well, Susannah, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us and for taking the time to chat with us today. I am so excited. I feel like every time I'm with you, I end on like this major high of like, I can conquer the world and do anything, because that's just the energy that you bring. Is like, you really just, you make queens. You're a queen maker. And so it's queen energy every time I hop off a call with you. I'm like, I'm going to go conquer the world because I can, because
Yeah,
it's again in my back pocket.
exactly. Oh my gosh, I love having you as a client. You are the best, and I'm so happy that that's how you feel after our conversations, because that's the fucking point, right? Like that's what coaching's all about.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Susannah. You are the best. And I cannot wait for, I can't wait for, wait, I'm going to do this again. Thank you so much, Susannah. You are the best. Thank you for taking the time today. And I cannot wait to share your message and help amplify the work that you're doing with my network and everyone who's listening. So thanks so much for listening, for being part of this episode. And yeah, see you next week.